Okay, now we're recording. Thank you, Ed. Okay.
And we're going to have Ad speak about has Ad shared his paper with everybody?
Well, we're gonna run through the thing and then let Ad, chime in so that he's not left out. This was in part driven by Ad's suggestion, so we
Right.
want to recognize his contribution.
I'm just wondering if everybody has seen his paper.
I don't know. Has everyone seen Ad's paper? I thought we sent it out.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well,
I don't know. I certainly didn't receive a copy with a group list, so I don't know if you sent it out to everybody.
Good.
Bart?
Okay, I'll resend it so that there's no confusion. Okay. So again, what we're trying to do here in this first thing here is just an overview, and with this source book, and we're going to look at a little video, a 7-minute video that kind of gives us that sort of summary. And there's a longer thing that goes into more detail. It starts to really dig into why people read this thing. And then then after that, then we'll engage with Ad on doing this. So what I propose to do right now is to get out of this, and I'm going to go to where did my video go? Here it is. Okay, so this is a 7-minute and 14-second video. And here we go.
There are 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. The first, Proverbs, showed us that God is wise and just. Yeah, we learned that God has ordered the world so that it's fair. The righteous are rewarded, the wicked are punished. In other words, you get what you deserve. But then we meet Ecclesiastes, who observes people don't always get what they deserve. Yeah, he says the world isn't always fair. That life is unpredictable and hard to comprehend, just like smoke. And this makes you wonder, okay, well, is God wise and just? Exactly. And so it's that question that is being explored in the final book of wisdom, Job. All right, let's dive in. So Job begins with a strange story that takes place up in the heavens, which are described something like a heavenly command center. So God is there with these angelic creatures called the sons of God, and they're all there reporting for duty. And God points out this guy Job, his servant, showing how righteous and good he is. And then one of these angelic creatures approaches. He's referred to in Hebrew as the Satan. The Satan? Who is this? Well, this word is actually a title, which literally means the one who is opposed. So out of this whole crew, he is the one questioning how God is running the world. And he proposes that Job might not actually love God, that he's only a good person because God rewards him. If God were to take away all of the good things he gave to Job, then we would see his true colors. So he thinks Job is just working the system? That's exactly right. Maybe he's obeying just to get what he wants. So God agrees to this experiment and allows the Satan to inflict suffering on Job. And Job loses everyone and everything that he cares about. It is devastating. And remember, he deserves none of this. God himself said so. The remarkable thing is that in the midst of all this suffering, Job still praises God. At least for chapters 1 and 2. But then in chapter 3, we find out how he's really feeling inside. He unleashes this poem that reveals this devastation. It's a long, elaborate curse on the day that he was born. After this, some of Job's friends come to visit him to offer their help. And all of them are like, Job, you must have done something horribly wrong to deserve this. After all, we know God is just, and we know the world is ordered by God's justice and fairness, so you must be getting what you deserve. And for the next 34 chapters, the friends and Job go back and forth in very dense Hebrew poetry. His friends keep speculating about why God might have sent him such suffering, and they even start making up lists of hypothetical sins that Job must have committed. But after each accusation, Job defends his innocence. And Job is innocent. He is. He's also on an emotional roller coaster. At some moments, he's very confident that God is still wise and just. Yeah, in other moments, he's doubting God's goodness. He even comes to accuse God of being reckless, unfair, and corrupt. So by the end of the dialogue, Job demands that God come and explain himself in person. And God does so. He comes in the form of a great storm cloud. Now, God doesn't give Job a direct answer. He doesn't tell Job about the conversation with the Satan. Yeah, he does something very different. He takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe. He shows Job how grand the world is, and he asks him if he's even capable of running it or understanding it, just for a day. He shows Job how much detail there is in the world, things that we might see every day, but really don't understand at all. But God does. He knows it all intimately. He pays attention to the beauty and operations of the universe in ways that we haven't even
My class next week.
places that we will never see. Then to conclude, God shows Job two wondrous beasts and brags about how great they are. Yeah, they are dangerous. I mean, they would kill you without even thinking about it. And God says they're not evil. They're actually a part of his good world. And then that's it. That's God's whole defense. It's kind of weird. I mean, what was this all about? It seems to be this. From Job's point of view, it looks like God is not just. But God's perspective is infinitely bigger. He's dynamically interacting with a whole universe of complexity when he makes decisions. And this is what God calls his wisdom. So Job asking God to defend himself is actually kind of absurd. He couldn't comprehend this kind of complexity even if he wanted to. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves Job in a place of humility. He never learned why he suffered, and yet he's able to live in peace and in the fear of the Lord. But that's not where the book ends, because after this, God restores to Job double everything he had lost. And this, again, is surprising. I mean, is this a reward? Is God saying, congratulations, Job, you passed this elaborate test? No, I mean, the whole book just made the point that Job losing everything was not a punishment, and so now getting it back isn't a reward. So why does he get it back? Well, apparently, God, in his wisdom, decided to give Job a gift. We don't know why. But what we do know is that Job is now the kind of person who, no matter what comes, good or bad, he can trust God's wisdom. And that's the book of Job and the end of our wisdom series. These biblical books of wisdom are amazing. Each one offers a unique perspective on the good life, and you need to hear all of them together as you learn to live with wisdom and in the fear of the Lord. Hey guys, thank you for watching this video from the Bible Project. You can find a lot more videos just like this one on our YouTube channel, the Bible Project.
Okay, so now let me go back to, where did I go? Oh, this. Okay. So that was our YouTube introduction. The other one is actually far more detailed, and I encourage you to look at it. But let's go over here to this overview. Again, we're following Wikipedia here. So we have this book, which addresses the problem of theodicy, meaning why does God permit evil in the world through the experience of the eponymous protagonist. Job is a wealthy and God-fearing man with a comfortable life and a large family. So why in the world is God permitting evil? So God asked Satan, or the accuser, for his opinion of Job's piety, and then decides to take away Job's wealth, family, all his material comforts, because Satan accused that Job were rendered penniless, and without his family, he would turn away from God. Okay. So this is apparently the first poetic book in the Old Testament, of the Christian Bible. And the scholars are generally agreed, let's see, it was written when? Between the 7th and the 4th century BC before Christ, okay? So much more ancient than anything in the New Testament. So what do we have for structure for the book? We have a prose prologue and then an epilogue narrative that in between are framed with poetic dialogues and monologues. So it's very common to view the narrative framework as the original core of the book, which was enlarged later by the poetic dialogues and discourses, and sections of the book, such as the Elihu speeches and the wisdom poem of chapter 28 as late insertions, and so forth. But the main idea is the prologue is in 2 scenes, the first on earth, the second in heaven. And then there's Job's opening monologue, which is seen by some scholars as a bridge between the prologue and the dialogues, and others see it as the beginning of the dialogues, with 3 cycles of dialogues between Job and his 3 friends. The 3rd cycle is not complete. It's replaced by this wisdom poem. So that's the structure of the book. So let's just take a look at this. Here are these 3 cycles. Here we see the first cycle encompassing Job's response to these 3 people that are there. The second cycle, he goes through and does the same thing. And then the 3rd cycle, except again, remember he's missing something here. And then we have these 3 monologues, the poem to wisdom, his closing monologue, and Elihu's speeches. And then there's 2 speeches by God with Job's response and an epilogue with Job being restored. So if we look at this, we see the prologue on earth introduces Job as a righteous man, blessed with wealth, sons, daughters, and he lives in the land of Uz. This is a time of city-states. There's still no notion of countries or of nation states or anything. The Uz is apparently someplace in the far boonies of Palestine. I remember looking it up. It's nowhere near where you would think anything like in the New Testament with Jesus of Nazareth took place. It's out in the boonies. So the scene then shifts to heaven, and this is where we get into this discussion between God and Satan. And Satan accuses Job of being pious only because God has materially blessed him. And if he took everything away, he would surely curse God. And so God gives Satan permission to do so. And Job nonetheless praises God. Naked I come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This is not someone who is easily shaken. So God allows Satan to afflict his body with boils. And Job sits there in ashes, and his wife prompts him to curse God and die. Job answers, shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil? He just takes this in stride. So Job laments the day of his birth. He'd like to die, but even that is denied to him. That's part of the bet here. And his 3 friends accuse Job of committing sin and telling him that his suffering is all well-deserved as a result. Wait, someone's trying to get in. I'm just trying to see who tried to get in. Anyway.
Want to do the full view,
What do you want to do?
the view,
The view?
that would let you see everybody.
This is everybody. They just don't have their camera on. Okay. So, Job responds with scorn. So the interlocutors are miserable comforters, since a just God would not treat him so harshly, even though that's exactly what happened. Patience in suffering is impossible, and the Creator should not take his creatures so lightly to come against them with such force. So Job's responses represent one of the most radical restatements of Israelite theology in the Hebrew Bible. He moves away from the pious attitude as shown in the prologue and begins to berate God for the disproportionate wrath against him. He sees God as, among others, intrusive and suffocating, unforgiving, and obsessed with destroying a human target, angry, fixated on punishment, hostile, and destructive. And then he shifts his focus from the injustice that he himself suffers to God's governance of the world. He suggests that the wicked have taken advantage of the needy and the helpless who remain in significant hardship, but God does nothing to punish them. Some things never change. So then we move into these three monologues, the poem to wisdom, Job's closing monologue, and the speeches by Elihu, and the dialogues of Job and his friends are followed by this hymn to wisdom on the inaccessibility of wisdom. Where is wisdom to be found? It asks, and includes it has been hidden from man. Job contrasts his previous fortune with his present plight. He's an outcast, he's mocked, and he's in pain. He protests his innocence. He lists the principles he has lived by, demands that God answer him. Elihu, a character not previously mentioned, intervenes to state that wisdom comes from God, who reveals it through dreams and visions to those who then declare their knowledge. So God now shows up speaking from this whirlwind. His speeches neither explain Job's suffering, nor defend divine justice, nor enter into the courtroom confrontation that Job has demanded, and nor do they respond to his oath of innocence. Instead, they contrast Job's weakness with divine wisdom and omnipotence. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Job makes a brief response, but God's monologue resumes, never addressing Job directly. Job makes his final response, confessing God's power in his own lack of knowledge of things beyond me, which I did not know. Previously, he's only heard, but now his eyes have seen God, and therefore I retract and repent in dust and ashes. So God tells Eliphaz that he and the two other friends have not spoken to me, spoken of me what is right as my servant Job has done. So the three, Elihu, the fourth friend who is introduced here, isn't mentioned here, are told to make a burnt offering with Job as their intercessor, for only to him will I show favor. So Job is then restored to health, to riches and family, and lives to see his children to the fourth generation. Okay, so we have the authorship here. This appears to be in the style of the 6th century before Christ, as in the book of Ezekiel. He comes across as an exemplary righteous man of antiquity, and the author of the book of Job, whoever that is, has chosen this legendary hero for a parable. Scholars generally agree it was written between the 7th and 4th centuries before Christ, with the 6th century as the most likely period, and the anonymous author was almost certainly an Israelite, although the story is set outside of Israel in southern Edom or northern Arabia, and makes allusion to places as far apart as Mesopotamia and Egypt. So that's number one. Number two, the language of the book of Job stands out for its conservative spelling and its exceptionally large number of words and forms not found elsewhere in the Bible. This is indeed unique. Many later scholars, even down to today, looked for any sort of Aramaic, Arabic, or Edomite origin, original words, but close analysis showed the foreign words and foreign-looking forms are literary affectations, just designed to make it look authentic. Finally, Job exists in a number of forms. The Hebrew, the Masoretic text, which underlies many modern Bible translations, the Greek Septuagint, which was made in Egypt in the last centuries before Christ, Aramaic and Hebrew. And so that's why you find this diversity of translations, because there's so many different languages that the book of Job has been written in. So what about the wisdom tradition here? We have Job, Ecclesiastes, and the book of Proverbs that belong to the genre of wisdom literature, sharing a perspective that they themselves call the way of wisdom. Wisdom means both a way of thinking and a body of knowledge gained through such thinking, as well as the ability to apply it to life. It is attainable in part through human effort and in part as a gift from God, but never in its entirety except by God. The three books share attitudes and assumptions, but differ in their conclusions. Proverbs makes confident statements about the world and its workings that are flatly contradicted by Job and Ecclesiastes. Wisdom literature from Sumeria and Babylonia can be dated to the 3rd millennium before Christ, and several texts from ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt offer parallels to Job. And while it's impossible to tell whether the author of Job was influenced by any of them, their existence suggests that he was the recipient of a long tradition of reflection on the existence of inexplicable suffering. So what are some of the themes? Job is an investigation of the problem of divine justice. This problem, known in theology as the problem of evil, can be rephrased as a question. Why do the righteous suffer? In fact, there's a book which is called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? The conventional answer in ancient Israel was that God rewards virtue and punishes sin. This is the principle known as retributive justice. This assumes a world in which human choices and actions are morally significant, but experience demonstrates that suffering is frequently unmerited. The biblical concept of righteousness was rooted in the covenant-making God who had ordered creation for communal well-being, and the righteous were those who invested in the community, showing special concern for the poor and needy. So look at Job's description of his life in chapter 31. Their antithesis were the wicked, who were selfish and greedy. The Satan, or the adversary, raises the question of whether there's such a thing as disinterested righteousness. If God rewards righteousness with prosperity, will men not act righteously from selfish motives? He asked God to test this by removing the prosperity of Job, the most righteous of all God's servants. The book begins with the frame narrative, giving the reader an omniscient, God's eye perspective, which introduces Job as a man of exemplary faith and piety, blameless and upright, who fears God and shuns evil. The contrast between the frame and the poetic dialogues and monologues in which Job never learns of the opening scenes in heaven or of the reason for his suffering creates a sense of dramatic irony between the divine view of the adversary's wager and the human view of Job's suffering without any reason. In the poetic dialogues, Job's friends see his suffering and assume he must be guilty, since God is just. Job, knowing he's innocent, concludes that God must be unjust. He retains his piety throughout the story, contradicting Satan's suspicion that his righteousness is due to the expectation of reward, but makes clear from his first speech that he agrees with his friends that God should and does reward righteousness. Elihu rejects the arguments of both parties. Job is wrong to accuse God of injustice, as God is greater than human beings, and nor are the friends correct, for suffering, far from being a punishment, may rescue the afflicted from their affliction and make them more amenable to revelation, literally open their ears. In chapter 28, which is the hymn to wisdom, we introduce another theme, divine wisdom. The hymn does not place any emphasis on retributive justice, stressing instead the inaccessibility of wisdom. Wisdom cannot be invented or purchased, it says. God alone knows the meaning of the world, and he grants it only to those who live in reverence before him. God possesses wisdom because he grasps the complexities of the world, a theme which looks forward to God's speech in chapters 38 to 41 with its repeated frame, where were you when blah, blah, blah. When God finally speaks, he neither explains the reason for Job's suffering, which is revealed to the reader in the prologue in heaven, nor does he defend his justice. The first speech focuses on his role in maintaining order in the universe. The list of things that God does and Job cannot do demonstrates divine wisdom, because order is the heart of wisdom. Job then confesses his lack of wisdom, meaning his lack of understanding of the workings of the cosmos and of the ability to maintain it. The second speech concerns God's role in controlling Behemoth and Leviathan, sometimes translated as the hippopotamus and crocodile, but more probably representing primeval cosmic creatures, in either case demonstrating God's wisdom and power. Job's reply to God's final speech is longer than his first and more complicated. The usual view is that he admits to being wrong, to challenge God, and now repents in dust and ashes. But the Hebrew is difficult. An alternative understanding is that Job says he was wrong to repent and mourn and does not retract any of his arguments. In the concluding part of the frame narrative, God restores and increases his prosperity, indicating that the divine policy on retributive justice remains unchanged. Truly amazing. In the Second Temple period, which was from 500 before Christ to 70 in the modern era, Job began being transformed into something more patient and steadfast, with his suffering a test of virtue and a vindication of righteousness for the glory of God. The process of sanctifying Job began with the Greek Septuagint translation around 200 before Christ, and was furthered in the apocryphal Testament of Job in the first century before Christ, into the first century in the Christian era, which makes him the hero of patience. This reading pays little attention to the Job of the dialogue sections of the book, but it was the tradition taken up by the Epistle of James in the New Testament, which represents Job as one whose patience and endurance should be emulated by believers. When Christianity began interpreting Job, the verses concerning a Redeemer whom Job hopes can save him from God as a prophecy of Christ, the predominant Jewish view became Job the blasphemer, with some rabbis even saying he was rightfully punished by God because he'd stood by while Pharaoh massacred the innocent Jewish infants. Augustine of Hippo recorded that Job had prophesied the coming of Christ, and Pope Gregory I offered him as a model of right living worthy of respect. The medieval Jewish scholar Maimonides declared his story a parable, and the medieval Christian Thomas Aquinas wrote a detailed commentary declaring its true history. In the Reformation, Martin Luther explained how Job's confession of sinfulness and worthlessness underlay his saintliness. John Calvin's Job demonstrated the doctrine of the resurrection and the ultimate certainty of divine justice. So the contemporary movement known as creation theology and ecological theology, valuing the needs of all creations, interprets God's speeches in Job 38 to 41 to imply that his interests and actions are not exclusively focused on humankind. Jewish liturgy does not use readings from the book of Job in the manner of the Pentateuch, the prophets, or five Megillah, though it is quoted at funerals and times of mourning. However, there are some Jews, particularly the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, who do hold public readings of Job on the Tisha B'Av fast, which is a day of mourning over the destruction of the first and second temples and other tragedies. The candlelation signs for the large poetic sections in the middle of the book of Job differ from those of most of the biblical books, using a system shared with it only by Psalms and Proverbs. The Eastern Orthodox Church reads from Job and the Exodus during Holy Week, and Exodus prepares for the understanding of Christ's exodus to his Father, of his fulfillment of the whole history of salvation. Job the sufferer is the Old Testament icon of Christ. The Roman Catholic Church reads from Job during matins. Matins are what, mornings,
Yeah.
days,
Good
lunchtime?
Morning.
I thought it was mornings, yeah. In the first 2 weeks of September, and in the office of the dead, and the revised liturgy of the hours, Job is read during the 8th and 9th weeks in ordinary time.
In French, matin is morning.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I
And
think it's just morning prayers.
yeah, I think it's the morning prayer time. We even have Job in Islam and Arab folk tradition. Job is one of the 25 prophets mentioned by name in the Quran. He's lauded as a steadfast and upright worshiper. His story has the same basic outline as in the Bible. The three friends were replaced by his brothers, and his wife stays by his side. In Palestinian folklore, Job's place of trial is Al Jura, a village outside the town of Al Majdal, or Ashkelon. That is in Israel, Ashkelon. Uz was, like I said, out in the boonies. It was there that God rewarded him with a fountain of youth that removed whatever illnesses he had and restored his youth. Al Jura was a place of annual festivities, 4 days in all, when people of many faiths gathered and bathed in a natural spring in Lebanon. The Muwahidim, or Druze community, have a shrine built in the Shuf area that allegedly contains Job's tomb. In Turkey, Job is known as Ayub, and he's supposed to have lived in Sanliurfa. There's also a tomb of Job outside the city of Salalah in Oman. So he gets around. We find Job in music, art, literature, and film, deeply influential in Western culture to such an extent, no list could be more than representative. So musical settings from Job include Orlando de Lassus' 1565 cycle of motets, the Sacrae Lectiones, Novum et Propheta Job, George Friedrich Handel's use of Job, I Know That My Redeemer Liveth, as an aria in the 1741 oratorio Messiah. Modern works based on the book include Ralph Vaughan Williams' Job, A Mass for Dancing, and the French composer Darius Milhaud Cantata from Job, and Joseph Stein's Broadway interpretation, Fiddler on the Roof, based on the Tevi, the Dairyman stories by Shalom Aleichem. Neil Simon wrote God's Favorite, which is a modern retelling of the book of Job. Bruegel and Georges de la Tour depicted Job visited by his wife and William Blake, and produced an entire cycle of illustrations for the book. So clearly he inspired a lot of people. We see John Milton with Samson Agonistes, Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, Alfred Döblin, Berlin, Alexanderplatz, Franz Kafka, The Trial, Carl Jung, Answer to Job, Joseph Roth, Job, Bernard Malamud, Elizabeth Brewster, whose book Footnotes to the Book of Job was a finalist for the 1996 Governor General's Award for Poetry in Canada. Archibald MacLeish's drama, J.B., one of the most prominent uses of the Book of Job in modern literature, and was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1959. Verses from the Book of Job figured prominently in the plot of the film Mission Impossible 1996. Job's influence can also be seen in the Coen brothers' 2009 film, A Serious Man, which is nominated for 2 Academy Awards. Terrence Malick's 2011 film, The Tree of Life, won the Palme d'Or, is heavily influenced by the themes of the Book of Job, as the film starts with a quote from the beginning of God's speech to Job. A 2014 Malayalam film called Libamte Pustakam tells the story of a man who is losing everything in his life, and also has parallels with Dostoevsky's brothers Karamazov. Joni Mitchell composed The Sire of Sorrow, Job's sad song. Quite an impact. And then finally, the Russian film Leviathan draws on themes from the Book of Job. 2015, 2 Ukrainian composers, Roman Grigoriev and Ilya Razumayko, created the opera Requiem Eof. The premiere of the opera was held on the 21st of September, 2015 on the main stage of the International Multidisciplinary Festival, Gogol Fest, and in the third episode of the 15th season of ER, Emergency Room, I think is what that is, the lines of Job are quoted by the protagonist, Abby. And so it goes. So with that, let's go back to Ad. And what would you have to say here? How would you like to begin the discussion?
Well, and it should be a discussion, absolutely. I think I better tell the group things that you know about me, you and Marjorie know about me, that they don't know, just so that there's a framework around this. I actually locked on to the book of Job as a 14-year-old in 1970. Unlike the majority of you, I was born and raised and still participate in the Episcopal Church, kind of the very classic way of being for my American family, as well as the closest thing to my mother's Church of England as possible. I have as well a sister who's 9 years my senior. So a lot of the family and parents that are 10 years older than a lot of my contemporaries, both serving in two Allied armies during World War II. Why do I tell you all of this? It's because I got involved in discussions and thinking at a level beyond my years very early in life. So, you know, I was confirmed at age 12 in the church. I sung in the choir since I was a child. At age 13, I started questioning, because I think we can all remember what was going on in 68, 69, 70. I had my older sister, college years, you know, Democratic Convention, Chicago, a lot of stuff going on. We're all watching it on television. African Americans being hosed and German shepherds being sicked on them, and people not getting into schools. I'm going, what's going on? Again, at a years beyond what my contemporaries were thinking about. So I had a lot of questions going into my 14th year. I started a search for other religious views in the world at age 13. I was, although I had been confirmed, I started my real questioning of why do these things happen? Why do good Christians have views of other people? Why did the Crusades occur? Because you've got two groups fighting over one universal being who's watching out for humanity and helping create humanity. And so how does this go? What is this all about? At age 14th, in what my school would call the, second form, because I went to a very classic educational school, the second boys' school. The second form, we had a religion class. And I was asking many of these questions of the professor who taught some comparative, but mostly, you know, exploring in depth what our own backgrounds were. And he suggested that I look at the book of Job and come up with some framework for discussion and then write a term paper on it. Term paper is all of 4 pages long, but it gave me some very deep and abiding appreciation for relationship of God to man to God, men among men, the concept of suffering, which I translated later in adulthood into challenges rather than suffering, as I think I've mentioned in the course of our survey. And, you know, took it to heart to say, okay, Ad, you're going to face a number of these things, even though you wish to be good and you wish to be well educated and you wish to be appreciated by others and appreciate others. you will come face to face with things like evil and suffering, challenges that are unavoidable. And how do you come to know that in God's universe, these things can happen to me as an individual, to all of us as individuals, and to groups of individuals, and why it continues to persist. So that was the basis of how I got into thinking about Job. And I've shared with Bart and Marjorie, you know, there are many episodes in my life where I can just say, okay, this is a Job moment, and, you know, grin and bear it, and it doesn't hurt any less. And there may be a curse, but I come out of it because I've been on a search to ask the questions. I've gotten some answers. Job is a book of wisdom. That became very clear to me early on. I appreciate, because of this survey aspect, that there are other books of wisdom and that they're all related. I didn't know that before. I also found it very interesting that the compatriots of Job who were having a dialogue with him, none of them are Israelites, which introduces a whole new interesting aspect to Job for me, which is that quote unquote foreigners, not Israelis, are part of the context of a Jewish faith. So it becomes more worldly as a result. I guess I'm not sure that I have much more to add other than it affected my life very early on. It addressed some questions that I had, and it has been with me long enough so that when I had a lunch one time with a rector early on in Easton of one of the Episcopal churches down here over lunch, because I was asking why the Episcopal Church had changed so much. I walked away from it, and when I came back, the rock had moved. A lot of the English traditions wiped out. And I was talking to him, and he said, "Well, tell me about you." And I said, "Well, I've lived a lot of the Book of Job in my life." So I say Job, but I'm picking up on parts Job, which I think is a better interpretation of the pronunciation. And that's kind of my story. It's a very, you know, seeing that it is one of three books of wisdom, that there's Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, which I was also very close to and quoting when I was in the 8th grade to classmates, giving our daily openings, where there are changes. It goes from a just God, a righteous God, and follow that path, to questions with Ecclesiastes over, it's not quite so clean, to Job, where bad things can happen to good people. And what's the explanation? And the explanation is, we can't possibly know. It's just something to bear up under, experience it for what it is, and move forward over or around it.
Thank you very much. Has anyone else actually read the Book of Job? So this is virgin ground for everyone. Okay.
Well, I mean, I've certainly looked at it from the Buddhist perspective. So, you know, which is a little bit different from.
Tell us about that.
It's not move around it. What was the other word you used?
Well, over it, around it, and I should say through it.
Yeah, in Buddhism, it's through being open to it. So there is an actual opening in the body and the mind that allows the experience to zap through you. It could last for a while, but it's a moment-to-moment process. So the challenge is a concept, or the suffering is a concept, but when it's happening in the body, it's a moment-to-moment process, and the pulsations in the body will tell you that it's not happening on any continuous basis. And when it's not happening on a continuous basis, it's actually very bearable. You may not like it, but it's bearable. So, and I mean, and then the other Buddhist perspective also is that we come into life because of craving. And when the craving is gone and we purify our defilements, we go back to being, which is being God is being. And so nobody is responsible. We are the ones who are really responsible because of our craving and because of our defilements. So it really puts the job on us to purify ourselves and takes the burden off somebody else doing it for us. And when you start doing it, then there is a lot of peace that you gain from that. And that makes life very different. The mind changes and the experience changes because you're no longer at that point a self. You're the energy of the universe at that point. And it has a very different feel to it.
There are many books that have had an effect on me, and that I recall and remember and say, yes, that book is part of my personality over here. But there are few that I would say have had a profound effect on me, and profound effect on my life. And Job is one of them. And it happened
Which one?
earlier than most people would imagine, but it was something that I could relate to and could face my early adulthood on through adulthood with.
Which book was that?
Book of Job,
Uh-huh.
the one we're
Would you like to
discussing.
Yes,
share
yes.
The writing
Excuse me?
would add, I thought that we had shared it with the whole group, and I'm sorry that we didn't. Would you like to share the writing that you shared with Bartman from?
Yes, please. I could maybe grab it if you want me to. I could go read it to everybody.
How old were you when you wrote it again?
14.
14. I thought it was, very profound.
Yeah, okay, Ed, is it handy?
Yeah, I'll be back in a moment.
And I think they are universal questions. And, we can debate the answers. But I think it is something universal. I've had several periods in my life that I refer to as my Job periods.
Oh, I think we live it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all live it all the time in many ways.
So it may, truly be archetypal in the
Mhm.
Jungian sense.
Yes, it is. It is.
So, the musings of a 14-year-old, and I'll use the word Job because that's what I'm used to. The book of Job discusses many of the most basic questions that can be asked. It does not, however, discuss some of the more basic questions which are more relevant to our times and which are asked more often in this day and age. Again, this is 1970, so big stuff happening. The following essay will be broken up into two major parts. Initially, there will be a discussion of the book of Job, in which I will show the major questions that were posed by the characters and the tactful answers which were given in response to these questions. Secondly, I will respond to these questions with my own meager yet sincere intellect and pose what I consider to be some more basic questions which the book of Job does not answer. The major questions asked by the book of Job are: what is man? What is God's relationship to man? What is the nature of the universe? And what are the most important questions which can be asked? I think the first two questions can be answered together. What is man and what is God's relationship to man? Man is an animal who is above all other creatures, yet one who is below the omnipotence of God. He is nowhere close to the same level as the Almighty, and therefore the providence of one such as God must be beyond the comprehension of man. In Job, the man in the book, you see that the individual is not really affected by great catastrophes. Sure, these calamities which befall him will hurt for a while, but time will heal his wounds, i.e., mental wounds. But when you afflict the individual himself, and I'm talking there about the boils, he will curse the day he was born and condemn religion and be disinterested in religion, etc. Man will also question the justice of God. Yet Job's murmurings under his afflictions and his impugning the righteousness of God in afflicting him teach us that it is presumptuous of man to arraign God before the bar of human reason, seeing that his ways, his capitalized, are beyond the comprehension of man, whose tradition is to fear God and eschew evil. Man questions the validity of some affairs, though these are above his comprehension, as can be seen by the previous example. Next question, what is the nature of the universe? God speaks of this himself when he talks to Job out of the whirlwind. He talks of his greatness in creation, his manifold wisdom, and the singular and varied instincts bestowed upon the lower creatures, and his power in the rule of the nations and the world of the mind. God speaks of all these things. Science is introduced. And Job is humbled before his magnificence. The last and probably the most important question raised by the book of Job is, what are the most important questions that can be asked? The book of Job itself raises several important questions. I will list the questions I think it raises and which it explicitly or implicitly answers. Is God just? Can a man or man collectively be just in God's sight? Is there a completely righteous and upright man? Are sinners the only ones afflicted with calamities? And is it wrong to judge man by their trials? Does man serve God for naught? Is there such a thing as disinterested religion? Is God a personal God? Or is he aloof from the human scene? Is religion meaningful? And many others. In some manner, all of the above questions and all of the questions in this first part of the essay are answered in the book of Job. To the question, what is God's relationship to man? I answer, it's not very good. To clarify this, I will go into more detail. To me, God seems aloof from the human scene, and he doesn't seem to be a personal God. He seems distant and vague. He doesn't seem to be helping mankind. We still wage war and kill our brothers, and we are contaminating the world to the brink of extinction of the human race, some animal species, and life in general, and the destruction of this world we live in. Is God helping to prevent us from doing this? I know that he has created us with a mind to think for ourselves, yet if he loves us, he will not want to see us kill ourselves. I believe, as the wise men of ancient times believe, that this universe was made by one creator, yet I question if he still creates. There are many questions that the book of Job does not ask that I do ask. I realize that the book of Job was written with the supposition that there is a God, yet I pose these questions. Is there a God? Where is he? Can we see him or just his works? Was there ever a God? And if there was, is he still alive? Why does man not act the way he does? And is he a part of nature? Why is religion meaningful? Why doesn't God help mankind in this world now, before it's too late? And why has the faith I once had gone out of my heart? I believe that I, as an example, represent a number of people who've lost their faith in many of its aspects. If you have asked yourself any or all of the above questions, which I have posed, I do not suggest that you look in the book of Job for the answers, but search sincerely in your own heart and in other books for the answers. You may or may not find the answers to these questions. Search! Exclamation point. So that's a 14-year-old.
We would have been friends.
Excuse me?
I said, we would have been friends.
Thank you. I'm sure we are now.
But I love that. I love the seriousness of it, the earnestness of it, and the sincerity.
Yeah. Well, it translated in, I mean, even into my social life. I had much older friends for most of my high school career, and then just kind of worked out that way because we could talk about things at depth.
So I'd like,
Especially after my family moved to Connecticut from New York City. All my friends were several grades ahead of me in school.
Yeah.
And it was often difficult. And I was often running away back to New York just to have somebody to talk to.
and that's what I'm interested in is your path. You know, I just started reading today about Pico della Mirandola and the Christian Kabbalah. And he was, Pico was like 13 when he started studying, and he was 20, by the time he was 23, he had published the oration. It was like 900 theses.
Wow.
Blows my mind. The other thing is your classical education. I had which I think is something that's missing in our society now, something that's needed. I had a couple of years of prep school, but at the time I was the Teflon preppy. It didn't stick. In 1453, the fall of Constantinople, the Greek expats ended up back in Italy, Florence in particular, with the original Greek New Testament, and the European scholars had not had access to that for like over 1,000 years. And that I think is the basis for the conversation that we as a nation and the world need to have in order to move forward.
Yes, so much is being lost now in the deliberate, dumbing down of, well, the whole world, but I think especially the United States. They don't want people asking these kinds of questions.
There's one very interesting statistic that I've been paying attention to for the last 15 to 20 years, and that's the average number or the number of words that the average student knows in the English language. And it used to be 18 to 20,000, and it's about 8,000 now.
Wow.
So people can't even express themselves properly. And it's because we've got I've had some family members, extended family members in the educational system, and they say, the opposite side of the coin to No Child Left Behind is no child gets ahead. And
that's terrible. Wow.
and they lament the fact that you can't open up the reins for really good students,
Right.
because they'll just get too far ahead of the crowd in the public school system.
Which is, it's a shame that it's been really kind of destroyed.
Yeah.
The average age for reading, I believe, is 7th or 8th grade level for New York Times, because that's the national average.
Yeah.
So, I mean, really, where are we going? And then we say, how is it that these immigrant kids come and do so well? because education is a value in other cultures, which it isn't here.
I figured out that I was partially homeschooled without it being, framed that way. But my mother was in the process of becoming a teacher when I was growing up. And it was just the way that my parents raised me. I was the oldest, and I had two siblings with different degrees of brain damage. So I was used to being different, and they just kind of, encouraged it and empowered me. And if I asked questions, like, well, what does that mean? My mother would say, I'm not going to tell you, look it up.
Yeah.
That was her mantra. So I grew up with all kinds of dictionaries and books on etymology, and just I became a proofreader, in my late teens, early 20s.
Very similar upbringing. I mean, we would ask a question and would be instructed to go to the encyclopedia.
Right.
And we also had, my parents it took National Geographic maps and carved them out and pasted them on one wall in our daylight basement. And we'd ask a question of where a country was, and they said, go find it.
Right.
So it was very much of you could ask questions, but you had to rely on yourself to learn. Getting back to Bud's point about the fall of Constantinople, it's related, but it's not on point. One of the things that I've found over the last several years, and Bart, you'll have an appreciation for this about me for other reasons, but I've kind of been drawn to the Orthodox Church. I can't understand the ceremonies itself, but I did get from this Episcopal rector that I've spoken with over time, that he agreed that so much of the church has changed so much more slowly within the Orthodox Church that you get back to more of the core values or the core lessons that were being taught, the core Bible even. And I don't know how true that is, but has anybody have you explored the Orthodox
Well,
Russian, Ukrainian, Syrian?
no, I was raised Catholic, but my mother had me when I was 7 years old, go back to where she was born in the Pennsylvania coalfields. And I went to an Eastern Rite Catholic church 7 days a week, where everything was in Slovak. Okay. And so I learned to sing these incredible hymns. All of this I've forgotten. Okay. And then I had a first communion. The Eastern Rite has, again, a wooden panel wall with these pictures of saints and cherubim.
The icon.
And, icons there making up the panels. And then there's a little doorway in the middle of the wall, which opens onto this altar, which is where the priest and the altar people handle the preparation of the communion. And the communion was actually bread and wine. Okay. So I had a first communion there. And then I went back to Detroit, where we were in a Roman Catholic church, because the Eastern Rite Church was way, way too far away. So we went to the local Roman Catholic church, and I went through confirmation there. And that was where I was told, I'm going to become a soldier of Christ. And I said, who are we fighting? What's the battle about? And they said, oh, you have to convert everybody. And I said, I think I'm out of here, So
yeah, I understand that. Completely understand.
Yeah, but it was the incredible power of these polyphonic Slovak hymns when you're singing these things, and you're 7 years old, but the whole place is filled with everyone singing these things, and this is 7 days a week. Okay, it's all died out now. It's all gone, but it is what it is, and it's a mystical experience.
It's very powerful.
So, yeah, sometimes we just go through videos, online together. They're just so transcendent. They're so powerful. It's
Yeah.
it's really tragic that it's being lost. But I think there is an effort to revive it. And it's just so transcendent. I think it's what's missing, from mainstream
Well,
religion.
yeah, we would like to create a chant group at our Unitarian place, because some of these, these chants, these Gregorian chants, and they're incredible.
Oh yeah.
So some of the Buddhist, the super low Buddhist stuff, these are incredible. How you really become a mystic doing these chants.
You do, and they have a powerful effect not only on mind and spirit, but on body as well. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
the vibrations really, it gets you into a communal body that is pretty
Yeah.
powerful and can be very healing.
It's very physiological. It's very
Yeah.
energetic.
With me, the word is tradition. I grew up in the Congregational Church, and one of my friends and mentors is at the Congregational Church in Old Saybrook, and they have a jazz service and a modern service and a traditional service. And I find myself going to a church over in Groton which has the traditional service, but it's tradition, not traditionalism.
Right.
Right.
Right. Sure.
My parents were atheists. They were pretty strict about it, but I was incredibly drawn to Hildegard of Bingen, and I just loved listening to Gregorian chant.
Yeah.
And I would lean. My father built hi-fis, a hobby, and they had this huge floor speaker, in the living room, that it was as tall as I was when I was about 3, and I would just lean into it. I would lean against it because I'd be vibrating from head to toe with it.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what to make of it. Here they were, these intellectual atheists, and their daughters having these religious experiences, in the living room.
Yeah.
And friends would come over and say, well, what's with Marjorie? And they'd say, we don't know. She just really, really loves it. And then they didn't want to influence me, so they allowed me to go with friends. And I loved Latin masses and Hebrew temple. And I would go with the neighbors to the Hebrew temple in Manhattan. We lived in Brooklyn. And for me, part of the wonder of it was going across the Brooklyn Bridge in the back of the station wagon. And so that was like really kind of part of the religious experience for me.
Yeah.
And they decided they shouldn't deny me that, which I'm glad of, but they didn't really know what to do with me. They didn't want me to be affected by the dogma, and all the judgment. But I was growing up in this kind of Skinner box when a babysitter said, don't you say your prayers?
Yeah.
So then they realized they were holding me back from just a connection. So that ultimately they brought me to the Unitarian Church, but that really felt too secular for me.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I'm just going to jump back to my little paper. This was kind of the beginning, I should also just mention, of my agnostic period, because I just saw so much turmoil in the world. I did claim finally, although I continued to go to church in the neighborhood, I began to say I'm really agnostic and I want to explore. Shortly after writing this, off to reading Siddhartha and Buddhist stuff, and just continued on exploring all over world religions, even non-religions like Mao Zedong's little red book and the Soviet sphere, Lenin and Communist Manifesto. But I came crashing back after an agnostic period to realize, for me, all things that were being said that were correctly said were one that were just different explanations among a variety of religions, particular to their culture and history, and that impossible to completely explain to anyone the connectedness, except that it was just connected.
Right.
Synchronicity.
Well, my joining this group,
That
complete
very either like Joseph Campbellian or Jungian, you know, and I think that, you know, I'm glad that you were allowed as a child to have that exploration and come away and come back and, you know, kind of discover your own term.
well, yeah. And you think about the period 70, 71, 72, 3, I mean, big stuff was happening all over the world and in the nation. So having TV, you know, having dinners with watching the Vietnam War going on your television, you know,
Right.
after school, it was crazy times. So there was a lot of questioning, but my parents were smart, let their kids go and explore and come back. So.
The 50th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers, Robert Ellsberg, Daniel Ellsberg's son, published a book called All Saints, which is like a daily devotional. And it's not the typical Catholic saints, because you have people like Camus and Dante in there, so it's obviously not the typical saints. But there's I'm gonna have to bring it with me. I'll put it in the.
I was going to say,
He actually helped his father publish and get the Pentagon Papers ready for publishing. And I had the pleasure of meeting him last year. I go to St. Francis House, which was started by Father Emmett, who was a Episcopal priest and Third Order Franciscan, and his wife, Ann Scheidman. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but I think you really fit in really well in that group.
well,
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah, do share that in the chat. You know, I think a lot of us had unusual reading backgrounds, and it would be nice to share all of that, you know, and compile a reading list. You know, we've done our best to put together our reading lists, which are pretty disparate, you know, just between the two of us, although there's some surprising overlap. But I think it would be really nice to bring together the groups. I mean, here we have two very serious Buddhists, we have a few Unitarians, and we have a few Judith is kind of an original Christian. And, you know, we should celebrate our diversity. You know.
I want to talk about a new religion. I'm a communitarian.
Right. Yeah, the ad, when you're talking about this stuff, I mean, for example, from 68 to 72 was when I was in graduate school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But, you know, that's when state occurred. I actually heard Daniel Ellsberg at one of the rallies that we're at.
I don't know if they're.
Nina, can you mute, Nina? That did. Did that do it?
Can you hear us?
I'm just
now?
trying to mute everybody. Anyway, so, I mean, other things that came up were, yeah, I was taking classes at Harvard for 2 years as well. And so going up to Harvard Square, and that was a real zoo back then. It was really, amazing things going on. But it was an exciting time, and I don't have any regrets about it. I was tear gassed, I don't know, half a dozen times by the cops, and and so it goes. I worked for Eugene McCarthy presidential campaign, and I worked for a black who was running to go into Congress and replace down in the North End, and it was racism at its worst. It was just unbelievable what was going on then, and on and on. So interesting times.
It was very interesting times, and again, having a sister who was, while I'm a kid in middle school, but she's at Lincoln Park during the demonstration, the Democratic convention, and police raining down on them. You heard a lot, and you related a lot to what was going on. And it was a trying time. The country was being kind of rent apart generationally by competing ideas, and it was an important time to experience.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve, you've just joined us on the video. Do you have a question or something you want to say?
I'm just enjoying listening right now.
Okay.
Nice.
What I find really interesting is that on a personal journey, there is integration after the upheavals, right? But as a society, you don't find that. I mean, we've gone through one crisis to another crisis to another crisis to complete polarization now. So it just, when I reflect on that, it's just so painful, because you would think that there would be some equilibrium that gets restored along the way. And I still think that's kind of an individual process rather than a social process somehow. At least not since globalization has hit. I've been studying shamanism, and I've really found that indigenous societies do have that haven't yet been taken over, that have retained that essence of who they were, because there is a cultural tradition that has grown, and in that there is their own mystical tradition that grows, because shamanism's got nothing to do with religion. I mean, it just takes from various archetypes and works on the mind and the body from that perspective. But if you look at that, I mean, none of us have really come into any equilibrium as a society. And if anything, with globalization, we've affected the whole world. So that current of destabilization can be found pretty much worldwide. That is for all societies that have been affected by it.
We've been talking about cycles here, though. This chaos, this insanity that we're going through is shifting from one age to another. And, after a couple of years of chaos, I think you're going to like the result. I think you're going to find some really, I see a light at the end of the tunnel. And
I hope so. There is a book there is a author called Murray Bowen, and he, I work with various healers, and I was working with I was talking to one of them, and, he was saying that I was asking the question, why is it that it seems to me that we're living in an age that feels so much like there's so much roughness and lack of etiquette and lack of decorum, and just so much roughness. And he said that, he was explaining to me that unfortunately, the people that should be having the children are not really wanting to have children. And there are people that are just having children for the sake of having children, and they don't have the tools to really raise them. So you're finding that there is this rampant I don't know what the word is right now because I'm tired, but you know, you're seeing all these, the roughness of society being more prevalent than anything else. And that's going to actually grow because those are the people that will exponentially keep having children.
If Reagan hadn't defunded mental health, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. The people who are institutionalized should be free, and the people who are free should be institutionalized.
I'm not talking about mental health. I'm talking about people who are just, I don't know what the right word is.
I think the word is meme.
Is what?
M-E-M-E, that there's this zeitgeist, this bubble that these people get attracted to, and it grows.
Yeah. I mean, as you were saying, you know, as Marjorie was saying, and as Andrew was saying, the kind of learnings that we did is not even prevalent. I couldn't even instill that in my children because the social strain was so against it.
Right.
You know, and now with the age of technology and everything being just immediate access, that level of learning is simply not there. That comes through effort, that comes through curiosity, that comes from really working at things.
And
You know,
I want to say is
sorry, my hand is bleeding, so I might have to
learning,
just go.
you know, which is, I think a lot of modern education came down very hard on learning by rote. But there's certain things, you know, like music, you just have to do a certain amount of memorization to get anywhere. And it's like everybody just sort of threw up their hands about any kind of discipline.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the point. That's the discipline is exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you for that word.
Right.
Yeah. And and being in trauma, because I work with people with trauma, I mean, the research is showing that children by the age of 10 are now getting increasingly dysregulated. And one of the, if it's not chemical, one of the biggest causes for bipolar disorder is dysregulation before puberty hits.
Oh.
So
I think there's a lot of just regular trauma.
yeah, all over the place.
Right.
So, I mean, thank you. And that comes from not having, you know, a rhythm in life early on, having a rhythm, you know, a structure, a discipline, a way of being that's given. And everything now is like, you know, why should I listen to you? You know, I mean,
And
I've got
everything
my
else
freedom
is-
here,
Right.
you know, that kind of an attitude.
Well, I've had people come to me sometimes wanting to learn astrology, but they have no idea how to memorize things.
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of it, that you have to have that discipline, and there's no way for me really to convey it to somebody else if they don't have that discipline. I've made up games, you know, I've given them, you know, mnemonic devices, and you know, anything to kind of trick them into memorizing and learning that they just don't want to do.
Yeah.
And they'll sort of create any distraction to get away from, okay, so let's see where we are with our exercises this week. And
So-
there's no,
so
I
just
can't do a mind meld and just give it to you. You have to show up, you know, you have to memorize, you have to.
Yeah, you have to do the work.
Yeah.
It's easy to get drawn into that negativity, but as Gandhi said, you know, we must be the change we want to see in the world. And the first step is removing all negativity from your life.
No, that's true.
We're doing just that here, but we are discussing why I think what are the causes for what's happening.
I'd like to throw in a couple of things here. You know, one regarding what you were talking about discipline. I'd like to share a study that was done regarding recidivism in prison populations, where the recidivism rate was extremely high, except for those prisoners who, while in prison, adopted the Muslim faith, and they they get out of jail and stay out of jail. And the conclusion was there was something about that faith that that helped them stay out of prison. In my estimation, it had nothing to do with the Muslim faith and everything to do with discipline. That most people gain what discipline they have in one form or another, through music, through military, through whatever it is for that individual. They gain some concept of discipline, and once they have that concept, they can use it in all areas of their life, but they have to get it somewhere in the first place. And this prison population in general never learned about discipline. Then they learn the Muslim faith, which is extraordinarily disciplined, where they have to pray, many times a day and follow rules and so on and so forth, and become very disciplined. Then they get out of prison and they're able to use that ability of discipline to just deal with the normal world and stay out of jail. That the Muslim faith is
Actually, Jack Cornfield has did it. I've forgotten the name of the guy, and he actually came to the Unitarian Church. I've forgotten his name, but he's in North Carolina, and he and Jack had started a program for prisons where they were teaching them mindfulness, and believe it or not, it had the same effect.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's the point.
I think the fact of the discipline.
Yeah, I mean, but you have a point. Absolutely, you're right. But I have to go. So thank you.
There's one other thing that I think goes with discipline, which is an agreed standardization of conduct. So what we've lost and why we have some of the problems that Nina has been pointing out, I believe, is because of lack of discipline, but also a lack of discipline around an agreed standard of conduct civilly. And until we get that back, I mean, we've grown into an age now where you can listen to whoever you want, you can believe whatever you want, you can say whatever you want, and you're right. And that's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
It's scary.
We're going to wrap this up, and I'll send out a Zoom recording of this to everybody, and with the slides, and we'll see where things go. So
But I'd like to have one comment. I've been silent all this time. I want to just throw one comment about the topic of Job, which is that whenever I hear about Job and all that is related to it, the overriding thing that I'm hearing is that something is being done to Job. That here is this guy, and poor Job is afflicted, externally by these circumstances. I have a completely different take, and I think that chaos is what is normal in the universe, and things are largely random. And the wonderful things in our life and the horrible things in our life are sometimes brought about by our own actions and attitudes, but frequently have nothing to do with our own choices and actions. They just happen. And we have good luck or bad luck, as the case may be, and attributing something being done to us, like why do bad things happen to good people? Well, because they just happen to all people, good and bad, they happen. And so this thing about it being done to one is something that I've never been able to rally around that as a concept. Just my 2 cents.
oh, thank you very much.
I want to say you've been blessed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I hope that we will continue this conversation, and we want to thank Ad for getting the ball rolling with your precocious ponderings.
Thank you.
And we hope that people will read the materials that we have invited you to explore. Jung's work in particular is incredibly deep, and Edinger is a very good translator of it. He makes it, I think maybe we should read that first because he makes it more accessible. But
So-
there's a lot there.
Yeah,
There really is a lot there.
no, we'll see. We haven't thought it through yet.
That's,
I just want to thank Stephen for his comments on discipline. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what's needed. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good, we're going to sign off.
Thank
Okay.
you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.